So the next video tutorial is Spring Inversion of Control Overview Part 2. So in the previous IOC Overview Part 1, so we have seen that what it means of inversion of control. So what is inversion of control? So here it is the design process of externalizing the construction and management of objects. It is the design process of externalizing construction and managing objects. Outsourcing creation and management of objects. Outsourcing creation and management of objects, and that outsourcing will be handled by an object factory. That outsourcing will be handled by an object factory. So that is basically a simple definition of inversion of control. So next we have seen two rough prototype. Okay, how we can develop the program simple inversion of control like concept. In the end, that application still it is hard coded. That application it is still hard coded. So now we will see more about this IOC. So in the previous example, we did not have the support for configuration. In the previous we need to make use of an object factory to help us out with this problem. Okay, so we will be making use of an object factory in Spring framework to help us out with the problem. Okay, to to avoid the hard coding. Okay, so consider this a diagram. We have my app class and it is requesting to the object factory. So give me a coach object. Give me a coach object. So based on the configuration file, okay, here it comes the configuration file. Based on the configuration file, so here we will be mentioning which coach object do we want. Okay, which coach object do we want. Okay, like we might be having so many classes. Okay, so implementations like baseball coach, hockey coach, or cricket coach. Based on the configuration file specification, we will be getting the specific implementation. So that is the big picture of the diagram here. Now it is configurable. Now we can say that our application it is fully configurable. So it is supporting for the requirements. Okay, it is supporting for the requirements. like different objects. That is what we can consider as the requirements. So the Spring container, the primary functions of Spring container is create and manage objects. The number one thing it is creating and managing objects. That's what we call inversion of control. And the second one, inject object dependencies. So that is what we call dependency injection. So all these things we will be doing learning practically in the following videos. So how we can configure the Spring container? How we can configure the Spring container? So there are three ways of configuring a Spring container. The first one is XML configuration. First one it is XML configuration file. So it is the legacy, means it is old version since the Spring initial version released. So the people used to configure Spring container by using XML configuration file. So that is what we call the legacy way of configuring the Spring container. If you're joining the main Spring developer team or joining a company that is already having existing Spring application, they are most likely using this way of configuring Spring container, that is XML by XML configuration file. So the next way of configuring the Spring container, it is by Java annotation. It is the modern way. Okay. So the next one, it is by using just Java source code. It is also a modern approach. We will be seeing all these three way of configuring Spring container in the following videos. So what are the Spring development process we do have? So mainly we have three. Okay, three development process. First one it is configure your Spring beans. Beans in the sense it is just an object. Beans plural it is objects. Now the first step it is to configure your Spring application. Sorry, configure your Spring beans. Okay, then create a Spring container. The second one is create a Spring container, and third one is retrieve beans from Spring container. Retrieving beans from Spring container. So how we can configure the Spring beans? That is step number one. So here we have one XML file. Let's say the name of the XML file is application context. This is the name of the XML file. Now observe here, in the beginning we have beans opening tag, and at the end we have beans closing tag. Now in the middle we have bean. Okay, just bean, not beans. Inside beans tag we have bean tag. So this bean tag having two properties. This bean tag having two properties. The first one it is id. So id is equal to my coach within double quote we are supplying, and for class property we are specifying the name of the class. So what is this my coach? It is the id. It's like an alias. Okay, it's like an alias. Now what is this class we are supplying? It is the fully qualified class name of implementation class. So in the main application we will be having the classes. Okay, implementation classes. So that is what we are supplying here, and this is the fully qualified name of the class. So com.love2code.spring demo, this is the name of the package. Inside that we have baseball coach class. The next step, it is creating a spring container. So the next step in developing Spring, it is create a Spring container. So the Spring container, it is generally known as application context. Spring container, it is generally known as application context. So now we have like here specialized implementations. So class path, XML application context, and annotation config application context, and generic web application context. So we will come to know what is this, all these things in the coming videos. So as of now we don't have to worry about this. So the next, it is how we can create a Spring container. We are using the class path XML application context. Okay, then we are um, we are creating an object for this class. Okay, this class path XML application context. Okay, for that we are supplying the configuration file, that is XML file. That is XML file. That is the in the first step we have created our configuration file. So that is what we are supplying here. First we are creating an object for class path XML application context. Context is a reference variable, and we are creating an object, and this object is referred by this context reference variable. Now we are supplying, while we are creating an object for this class, we are supplying within double quote application context.xml, that is the name of our configuration file. So here we are going to read an XML file that is on the class path. So in this case, in this example, we are going to read an XML file that is in the class path. So next, to make use of this class path XML application context, so first we are constructing this object, and we are passing in the actual name of the configuration file. Okay, first we are constructing this object. Okay, so we are basically first making use of this class path XML application context, and we are constructing the object of this class, and we are passing the actual name of the configuration file, configuration file that we have created. So what it is doing, we are going to read the XML file that is on the class path. We are going to read the XML file that is on the class path. As I explained from the first step, we had a file named application context.xml. So we can use any of the name. Okay, for this XML file, we can use any of the name. It is not fixed. The third step in developing Spring, retrieving the beans from the container. So once again, take a look at this diagram. So the first step it is, so we have created a configuration file, and then the second step is creating a container that we have done, and we have supplied that configuration file we have created in the first step. And this third step, it is the retrieving beans from the container that we have just created. So now in this step, so retrieving the beans from the Spring container, in this step we will be retrieving the objects from the Spring container. We have already created the container, Spring container. Now in the next step, in the third step, we are going to retrieve the beans, in the sense objects, from the Spring container. So it is just communicating to the Spring container. So give me a coach object, like that it is requesting. So based on the information that is in the configuration file, based on the information that is in the configuration file, it will give us the implementation of that given interface. It will give an implementation of that given interface. So how we are achieving that, it is, observe here this diagram. So we have created a Spring container by using class path XML application context. Then we have passed in the configuration file, that is application context.xml. Then in the third step we are retrieving bean from the Spring container. So here coach is an interface. Coach is an interface, and the coach is a reference variable. For this we are calling we are supplying, first we are calling the context dot get bean, context dot get bean. So here we are supplying two arguments. Here we are supplying two arguments. So the first argument we are supplying the id. Okay, so the first argument we are supplying the id. So whatever we have created our configuration file, in that we have mentioned the id as my coach. That is what we are supplying to the first argument of this get bean. Then we are supplying the interface. Okay, so now this is the implementation class. This is the coach is the interface, and baseball coach is the implementation class. Now as the in the second argument of get bean, we are supplying the fully qualified. Um, so here in the class in configuration file, for the class property we have supplied com.love to code.springdemo.baseball coach. Okay, now what is the interface? Okay, this is the coach interface. So baseball coach is the implementation class. We can replace this with the any of the sport like track coach. We have already created it. So the important point it is, so we have to make sure that it is with the same exact case. Okay, here if you specify id as my coach, observe the case here, the starting letter it is in the lower case, and the second word it is in the upper case. So whatever the case you have followed in the configuration file, the same case style you should be using while you are doing this retrieving bean from the spring container process. So same you have to supply here with the same case. So we already seen that the coach dot class it is actual name of the interface that baseball coach implements, or if we have the track coach, like that also implements the coach interface. So then we are actually going to, after all these things, then we are actually are going to retrieve the bean, retrieve the object, okay, from the spring container. So what is this spring bean? A spring bean is simply a Java object. We don't have to worry about the fancy term for this object. In Spring we call it as bean. Bean in the sense simply it is a Java object. When Java objects are created by the Spring container, then Spring refers them to as Spring beans. Whenever the objects created by the Spring container, then we are usually referring it as beans. So beans are created from normal Java classes. Okay, so Spring internally using the Java classes. Now by using the real Java classes, the Java classes it is creating the objects. So it is just like Java objects. Now observe the one point here. In the early days, there was a term called Java beans. In the early days, there was a term called Java beans. Spring beans have a similar concept, but spring beans do not follow all of the rigorous requirements of Java beans. Consider this point: spring beans do not follow all the rigorous requirements of Java beans. So there is a difference, like a slight difference. So it won't be following all the requirements of Java beans. Spring beans won't be following the rigorous, like it might be any of the different requirements of Java beans. So overall, in summary, whenever we see spring bean, we can just consider it as Java object. Okay, in the next video tutorial, so we will be doing some coding. So whatever we have learned in this video, that we will be put into the practical, and we will do some coding. Thank you.